Can you hear me now?
I can hear you. You're echoing. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I'm getting an echo.
It's on your end too. I hear it.
So how do I get it to stop echoing?
Depends on whose end it's on.
Is that working? Are you getting audio feedback?
Echoing.
Are you getting audio feedback?
Yes. Yeah, I'm getting a really bad one. Do you hear me?
Let me try something different.
Okay.
I can hear you, but it's messed. Let me try something different. I have an idea. I have a different microphone.
Okay.
Let me go get
yeah,
a
I'm
different
still getting an
microphone.
echo. Do you hear me okay?
Yes, it's still an echo. Hold on. I got a microphone, not a dildo.
Yeah, you probably already know earphones might help. Yeah, do whatever you need to do. Right, just hold on 1 second. I'll be right back while you do that.
Now I'm using a different mic.
Okay. Are we good now? Sorry about that.
Can you hear
Are you
me?
there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, there's no echo on my end. Do you hear me okay?
I hear you. Do you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think we're good.
Okay.
So welcome to QallOut, and thank you for accepting my challenge. I'm Julian, of course. I'm a resident debater here. Everyone in the QallOut community knows me pretty well because I've been on here for a little while now. Would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Warren Redlick. I run a Facebook page called Fair DUI. There's a website, fairdui.org. I wrote a book that was published in 2013 by Amazon. It was self-published, but it sold pretty well, has very good reviews. I've been a criminal defense lawyer handling drunk driving cases for less than 20 years, but close to 20 years.
Oh, sorry. No, I mean, like, everyone in my family is an attorney, including my twin brother and cousin, who's like my sister. And they told me that DUI, they don't like these cases because they're just a real pain. They don't like doing them.
I don't know if I would say they're a pain. If you know what you're doing with DUI cases, then, which is true with I think any kind of case, then it's an interesting challenge, and there's important things to know how to do. The biggest thing, the thing that motivated my book, was all the mistakes that my clients made that made it harder for me to defend them. So
I can understand that. I'll have to check out your book. I'm really interested in this. Obviously, I'm not a lawyer though.
Yeah.
So okay.
So go ahead.
Okay, I'll go ahead and get started with the debate. So the thesis statement is that marijuana use increases driving risk, or driving crash risk. And sorry, a cat will knock my camera out. The thing with this is, I don't think we really have accurate studies. I know this is actually a controversial statement because you think it's just common sense, like don't use marijuana and then drive, right? But there aren't conclusive studies. But one thing that we do know, and this is that in many states, someone can be convicted of an OMBI just for failing the drug test, a urine test, or a blood test, and marijuana can stay in someone's system for a long time. So I don't believe that should be enough to convict somebody. I think that, and this isn't the rule, but I think the rule should sway back toward needing to prove impairment. And I know it doesn't work that way in court, unfortunately. But and the problem being that if somebody fails this blood test or this urine test, that they can be convicted of an OMBI without any other evidence being presented. It's an open and shut case. So I think that we shouldn't exaggerate into saying that there's no risk, because the study we do, it's easy to prove that marijuana affects someone's depth perception and their ability to react. And so it's common sense, and it's kind of a moral argument really as well, because I don't think that I want to be behind somebody who is doing this. I don't think I would show up to my job and do this. But that's the same stigma that's being used in the workplace, that if I fail a drug test, I must be high on the job, and this stays in someone's system for 6 weeks. So I think it's a problem to try to say that it's just okay to do, because there's, for two reasons primarily. The first one is, I want to use the word liberalization, is marijuana is becoming liberalized, because it's really moving further towards decriminalization, but the word is legalization that everyone throws around. So I just like to call it liberalization. But the thing is that opponents of that, they'll always say, well, we have statistics that show that there's more accidents in these states where people are using marijuana and driving. So I think that's a problem which creates when you say that kind of statement. And I think really when you're trying to reform any one of these laws, because you're always going to be, this straw man argument is going to come up on the other side that you support drunk driving, even though you're saying, I'm just saying that failing the urine test doesn't mean that someone was driving intoxicated on marijuana that day. And this is actually in I don't like the National Highway and Traffic Safety Administration at all, because they're known to give funky statistics. But to keep on topic, and this is I'm just going to go ahead and quote from the article that you posted on our conversation on Facebook, and it says, many studies using a variety of methods have attempted to estimate the risk of driving after use of marijuana. For example, a recent meta-analysis study by Lee 2012 used 9 studies, 5 of which were based on self-report, of the remaining 4 studies. Marijuana use was inferred from a urine test in 3 of the studies, which really only indicates the drivers were marijuana users, but not necessarily had used marijuana prior to driving. The studies that used self-reporting produced increased crash risk estimates that range from 1.7 to 7.16 times as a result of marijuana use by drivers. The 2 studies that used the urine to determine marijuana use resulted in risk elements of 0.885 to 3.43 times, while 2 studies using blood analysis had risk estimates of 2.10 and 2.11 times. The overall pooled risk estimate was 2.6 times. So they are saying that we have numbers to prove that it does increase crash risk, but they're not good numbers because of going back to that you're only really, the only way to measure this is if someone had it in their system or they said they did it. So we don't have anything that's conclusive enough, and that's not what's being used in the courtroom. And when the legalization debate comes up, that hurts that.
Can I stop you there for a second?
Yeah, I'm done. Go ahead.
So what I hear is that you're cherry picking in the article. So first of all, people should know the article we're talking about is from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, Office of Behavioral Safety Research. It's titled "The Drug and Alcohol Crash Risk." Its authors are Richard P. Compton, Compton, and Amy Beming or Burning, Beming, I think. And the date of the study is February 2015. It's considered a research note. So what I see is you're cherry picking. I don't think it's intentional, but you're picking a part of the article and you're not picking the part of the article I told you to look at. So at page 8 of that research note, there's a section called Summary and Discussion. And that says there's no significant increase in crash risk for illegal drugs or drugs. There is a significant increase in crash risk for alcohol. And the key detail and the flaw in the previous studies that you mentioned is they didn't break out demographically who is it that they're dealing with. And this study did. So if your marijuana users are predominantly 20-year-old males and your non-marijuana users are primarily 50-year-old females, 20-year-old males have a higher crash risk than 50-year-old females. So they did a breakdown where they accounted for those demographics. And they said, okay, oversimplify, we'll compare 50-year-old women who smoke marijuana and have this level of THC in their blood with 50-year-old women who didn't. We'll compare 20-year-old males to 20-year-old males. And when they did that, for pretty much all drugs, they found no significant increase in crash risk. The results they're talking about are driven by the demographics of who uses illegal drugs. It's largely, not entirely, but there's a higher proportion of use among people who are more dangerous drivers demographically. And I think you're aware, you look younger than me. I'm 51. When a young male first gets his driver's license, his insurance rates are really high because young males have high crash risk. When you get older, your insurance rates go down because your crash risk rate is down. So the key detail in this research that I wanted to stress, and you were reading from it, let me read this. This study of crash risk found a statistically significant increase in unadjusted crash risk for drivers who tested positive for use of illegal drugs, 1.21 times, and THC specifically 1.25 times. However, and again, this is on page 8 under the headline Summary and Discussion. However, analyses incorporating adjustments for age, gender, ethnicity, and alcohol concentration levels did not show a significant increase in levels of crash risk associated with the presence of drugs. This finding indicates that these other variables, age, gender, ethnicity, and alcohol use, were highly correlated with drug use and account for much of the increased risk associated with use of illegal drugs and with THC. And just one other quick thing, this won't take long. If you go back to page, sorry, a second. I think it's page 5. There's a table 5 on page 5, adjusted odds ratio between drug use and crash risk. And basically for some drugs, they actually found a lower crash risk, but the difference was not significant. For other drugs, they found a slight increase that was mostly not significant. For marijuana, they found no difference. For illegal drugs in general, they found essentially no difference. The biggest one that they found, if I remember reading the details, was narcotic painkillers had a very slight increase in crash risk. And I can pause for a second, or I have one more point I could make. What do you want me to do?
Go ahead and state your entire argument, and I'll do my argument.
The important thing to realize is the difference between and alcohol. With most people who use drugs, like I've had people tell me before, I think in that discussion thread we were on, oh, if I've had marijuana, I know I'm not safe to drive. Difference between drugs and alcohol. People who drink think they're okay to drive, and they don't change their driving behavior. People who've taken a narcotic painkiller know, wait a minute, my abilities might be impaired somewhat, so I better drive more carefully. So where a drunk person will drive in a reckless manner, a person who's taken other drugs generally tends to drive more carefully because they understand the impairment and the drug has not affected their judgment in the same way that alcohol does. And the numbers with alcohol, by the way, are striking. Alcohol, when you have a significant amount of alcohol in your system, your crash risk goes way up. So that's a big difference. But anyway, I could say more, but I've been rambling for quite a while, so I'll stop.
Can I go ahead and ask you a question?
Give you a chance. Sure.
In the study, I mentioned, the problem is how they're being tested, because they're using a urine test and a blood test. So even though we're adding in some other factors that I agree with you that they are factors, especially young males are obviously more prone, they're out there than other groups to be in an accident anyway. But how are they measuring this?
This was, I think they actually looked at crashes and they tested people. I don't know how they, let me see if I can find that.
When you test someone after the crash, that's usually a blood test.
All study participants were asked for a breath alcohol test, oral fluid sample, and blood sample. Participation in the study was voluntary and anonymous and met federal standards. So it was breath alcohol, oral fluid, and blood sample, according to this. This is page 6 of the research note.
Do any of those?
So go ahead.
Do any of those tell me if someone used marijuana within the past 2 hours?
I don't know. I don't know if it's 2 hours. It depends how much marijuana you've had. Your body metabolizes marijuana. It starts off with it's called delta-9-carboxy-THC, and then it gets metabolized into another substance that still shows up on some drug tests.
Yeah, right.
You are correct that in some cases people will be prosecuted based on a finding of the metabolite, which does not impair.
Well, that's the law here in Ohio. You know, my father was an attorney, and he might have warned me when I was a teenager that if I was in an accident, that I was probably going to be charged with a felony. so I mean, that is how they're enforcing this. And going back to the science that's being used here, blood and urine test, yeah, it can take up to 6 weeks, and every person's different. I mean, it affects everyone different. It stays in everyone's system differently. And so you're going to stay in your system for 6 weeks, and these other drugs don't. That kind of goes back, because I see you have 3 points, and you have one that's just cherry picking, and I'll get to that in a second. But you say that as you're saying that you have to put race and gender and age and this sort of thing in. I agree with you, but it doesn't really solve the problem here. That it's how the test is, how the science, how the test is being measured, the blood and urine test. That can't tell me if someone was using it in the past 2 hours. It just tells me if they use it or not. Because actually, there's many studies on this, and I began my research with the Journal of Medicine, and they had some pretty interesting print studies that just say that we can't figure this out. We need a test that would tell us if someone used it in the past 2 hours as opposed to a blood or urine test. We can't. There's really no way for us to get numbers here. And this is from the National Library of Medicine. And they say that all recent studies highlighted that a recent use of cannabis impairs driving ability, and that it would be advisable to intensify roadside testing for drugs of abuse. So I don't think we can really get good numbers here until we have a test, a roadside test. I know that there's a saliva test that they don't use it in a lot of states. I don't know if it's a good test or not, because I know I'm sure you'd agree, a breathalyzer isn't a good test. It's a biased test against the defendant. I'm sure you would agree with that. So I don't know if these saliva tests.
So here's the thing. First of all, and I don't think we talked about this yet tonight, there's a difference between impairment and driving risk, crash risk. So we can agree that pretty much any drug, including Tylenol, cough syrup, whatever, can impair some function. Listening to your car stereo can impair function. Going to a drive-through restaurant, taking food with you can impair your driving function in some ways. It's all kinds of things that can. Having children, I have kids. Having children in the back seat can impair driving function. Having your wife in the passenger seat can impair driving function if she's pissed at you. So there's all kinds of things that can impair.
Is it your choice to do those things or not? I mean, would you want was it okay for your school bus driver to smoke marijuana and drive? I mean, sure.
Okay, so you're jumping ahead to a different question. My point is to distinguish between marijuana or other drug impairment and the increased crash risk. And the answer to your question is, from the science, a bus driver who smoked marijuana is no greater crash risk than a bus driver who didn't, if it's the same demographic. Now, if you're telling me I have a choice between a 20-year-old bus driver who smoked marijuana and a 50-year-old bus driver who did or didn't smoke marijuana, I'll take the 50-year-old bus driver, because the 50-year-old bus driver is going to have a lower crash risk. But if you're saying the same driver smoked marijuana or didn't, the science, according to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, is that that driver is no greater crash risk after smoking marijuana than before. And I think I've lived a little bit. I'm guessing I'm older than you. I've lived a little bit longer. I've seen a lot, especially being a criminal defense lawyer. We have this societal, like you said, common sense at the beginning of your remarks. And what you're really saying when you say common sense is the propaganda that's been drilled into your head since you were a child. And my head. And everyone's head. We have been bombarded with propaganda that drugs are dangerous, that alcohol is dangerous, that masturbation's bad for you, whatever it is. All these things are bad for you. Don't have premarital sex, whatever, all this other stuff. And the question is, are you able to rise above the propaganda and recognize that, no, it's actually not common sense. It's just the propaganda you've been buried with since you were a kid.
Okay, well, look, you're not answering my question, because it's not. The thing is that these studies are only accounting for if marijuana is in someone's system, not if they've used in the past couple of hours. So they're not saying at all, as I quoted from the study, we don't know. We don't have a way to we don't have a way to measure that on the road, so there is no way to come up with good numbers. And I guess I didn't really get to your third point, and this is also in the medicine journal. The studies actually show that it's less dangerous than alcohol and other drugs, and I really don't disagree with that at all. As I mentioned to you, I follow your page on Facebook because I am very interested in this subject, and I mean, I don't like the word, I think it's overused, but I believe that I am very socially libertarian. I'll put it that way. I don't think that marijuana should be illegal at all. And the purpose of the topic is that I think that failing the test is not a good reason to convict someone of an offense. I think that the prosecution should have a greater burden of evidence than that. So I think that if you want to take the study and say we need a greater burden of evidence because we just didn't prove that the person was using 2 hours before the crash or the arrest or whatever the case is, that we need something that shows that, as opposed to, well, it was in their blood, open and shut case, it's over. So
Okay.
that's the question. We're not. How are you able to measure if it was a couple hours before? Because you're saying that the National Highway and Traffic Safety Administration, whose statistics are a joke, anyway, that they're saying that it's okay, but I think they're really just saying that that just having this in your system is not enough to say that there's an increased crash risk.
Okay. So, first of all, I don't think the NHTSA is saying it's okay to use drugs and drive. In fact, their press releases surrounding the study were saying, you shouldn't use drugs and drive and it should be illegal and all this other stuff. They just basically ignored the conclusion of their own research note. The research note was direct and honest, and then the people at NHTSA says, well, we can't say that, so they came up with something else to say. But specifically to your point about how they measure impairment, first of all, I'm not an attorney in Ohio. Never handled a case in Ohio. I've handled New York and Florida. I've seen some cases from other states. Generally speaking, the way drug-impaired driving is proven is partly on some kind of drug test, usually if they have one, and partly, and I would say a lot, on the police officer's testimony that I observed him, I detected the odor of marijuana, I observed he was impaired in this way or that way, he had bloodshot eyes, whatever it is, and they interpret that, and a jury is allowed to convict based on a guy with a high school diploma or GED, a few hours of training, and dubious ethics, and frequently dubious honesty, and that's enough to convict. And juries have been flushed with the same propaganda that you have, and when that guy in the uniform comes in and says blah, 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 they tend to believe the guy in the uniform. And it's actually a very difficult thing as a defense lawyer. Almost every case I have, I show the cops.
I've used this argument in other debates, actually, on my side. I totally agree with you. I think we think a lot more alike here. It's just but the thing is, I think to move towards legalization and some reform of these OMBI laws that aren't reducing crashes. The crashes are going up, but they change the wording around to make it sound like they're going down when they're not. But that we need to keep it in a narrative that people can understand and that makes sense, and that's failing the test does not mean that someone's guilty of an OMBI.
No, I agree with you. I mean, first of all, there's another problem with the test, which is that the tests are, whether it's a blood test or urine test or whatever kind of test it is, ultimately it's tested at a police crime lab. And there's a long history of abuses at police crime labs. And even the U.S. Supreme Court has taken note of the history of abuses at police crime labs. So the police crime lab's job is to say the person's guilty. You would think the police crime lab's job is to offer an objective evaluation of the sample that they provided. But there's case after case and story after story of police crime labs fudging their numbers to get the results that the police want so they can convict people. And so I don't even trust the tests in the first place. But you hit on a good point about this question of what showed up in the test. Was it delta-9 carboxy THC or was it a metabolite? I'll give you a story. If you don't want me telling a story, it's not a marijuana story. But a few miles from where I'm sitting, about 2-3 years ago, there was a car accident. And a woman driver involved in the accident who the police thought was at fault was taken to the local hospital, West Boca Medical Center, and they drew her blood. And they found alprazolam, which I believe is Xanax, in her blood. That's the police blood test. So I get called. Her boyfriend's a friend of mine. He calls me. I say, go get me the hospital records. So he gets me the hospital records. Wouldn't you know, the hospital drew her blood and tested it half an hour before the police drew her blood. And guess what they found? No Xanax. There was no alprazolam in her blood when the hospital tested her blood a half hour before the police drew it. So there's two possibilities there. One, the police blood test is magically more sensitive than the hospital blood test. Or two, the police cheated. The police crime lab cheated, the police cheated, whatever.
Oh,
so
I believe it. I mean, I don't know if you've ever read DUI blog, the attorney Lawrence Taylor from.
I know who he is.
Well, he actually says that they have ready police reports, fill in the blank, ready-made police reports.
Yes. Well, they're trained. You know, every drug case, every DUI case I have, the driver had impaired speech. I had a client who was from Japan, and they said he had impaired speech. How the hell would you know? I had, they always have the odor of alcoholic beverage. And I'm just going to ask you, and I asked the police officers this on cross-examination, by the way. Well, what did it smell like? You know, what is the odor of alcoholic beverage? I mean, I had a fruity beer tonight. What does that smell like versus wine, versus hoppy beer, versus Guinness, versus whiskey, versus vodka? I mean, there's all kinds of alcoholic beverages. And what's funny is I would say most of the time when I ask the police officer, well, what did it smell like? They get puzzled because they're not trained to answer that question. They're only trained to check off the box that says odor of alcoholic beverage, because it's they got a thing with check boxes, and they know they're supposed to check off that box. They don't actually remember what it smelled like, and they lie. So the common lie that the police tell is, well, it smelled like alcohol. So let me ask you if you know the chemical property of alcohol as it comes to odor. Do you know?
No, go ahead.
Alcohol is odorless.
Oh, like
alcohol
in vodka, for example.
Alcohol, pure alcohol is odorless. Alcohol has no odor. The things that you drink it in, that it's contained in, vodka, whiskey, whiskey has a smell. We can all agree whiskey has an odor. Different beers have different odors. Wines have, everybody knows you get wine, you swirl the glass around, you sniff it, there's a smell. But they're very different smells. And I would say in general, they don't smell, I don't know what alcohol would smell like, but a fruity beer smells fruity. A glass of wine typically smells a little bit like grapes. I'm not sure maybe it smells like oak, or it smells like whatever fruit. If you were, you're into wine, I'm not into wine. I don't drink much at all.
Yeah.
But if you're into that sort of thing, then everything has particular scents or odors, whatever. But, if you think about it, by the way, when police say, I detected the odor of alcoholic beverage, or let me say it the way they say it, I detected the strong odor of alcoholic beverage emanating from the vehicle. And, you've probably heard that smell is one of the strongest types of memory. And yet they can't tell me what it smelled like. So there's a whole series of lies that the police are trained to tell. I detected the odor of alcoholic beverage. He had impaired speech. He had impaired motor coordination. I did these roadside tests and they failed them. And they always do those tests wrong, by the way. A big chunk of my book is a breakdown of all the roadside sobriety tests and the bunk that they are.
If you take the test, you gotta
So-
fail it, right?
What's
If
that?
you take the test, you're gonna fail it, right? Just for the people who
Oh,
are
some
watching.
lawyers describe them as designed to fail. It's not that you're going to fail them. It's that the police officer is going to say you failed them. And think about, you've probably seen this, where the police officer's got a pen or something and he moves it in front of the guy's eyes. Have you seen that? It's called the horizontal gaze nystagmus. Your eyes are supposed to follow the stimulus, they call it. So you've got a guy who had, generally speaking, has a high school diploma, okay, and not in medicine. Okay, he didn't go to a medical academy for high school. He went to just a general high school. Maybe he's got a high school diploma, maybe he's got a GED. He went to a seminar that was maybe a week long, and he spent a few hours learning how to examine someone's eyes. You with me so far?
Yeah.
And that guy's doing an eye exam. Could you imagine if you went to your eye doctor and the eye doctor said, you know what? Instead of me examining your eyes here in the office, let's go out by the side of the road at night, and I'm going to have a guy with a high school diploma examine your eyes. I'm going to guess that you would probably not go back to that eye doctor anymore. You know, maybe you might pick a different eye doctor after that.
Mm-hmm. I think this is actually another problem because getting back on topic, because the thing is, a blood test would be a lot more accurate for an OMBI. It's more scientific, but not for marijuana though, because it stays in someone's system for 6 weeks. So,
no, but when you do, when you do a blood test for marijuana,
you can just say, hey, look, it's in their system. Closed case.
Hold on. When you do a urine test, generally speaking, it doesn't distinguish between the active delta-9 carboxy-THC and the metabolite that's inactive and doesn't impair. But if you do a blood test, generally speaking, the blood tests that I've seen break down the active marijuana versus the inactive metabolite. And you can see in a blood test, you can't see when they smoked it, but you can see how much of the active amount of marijuana they have in their system, and then that tells you.
It's not in the study. I mean, that's very interesting to me because I wasn't familiar with this, and it's not in the study.
I'm just talking about the cases I've seen. And by the way, I wanted to mention to you, because I think this is relevant and people find it interesting. Did you see the Tiger Woods story that Tiger Woods was arrested for driving with drugs?
When it happened a while back, yeah.
Okay. Did you see the video?
I don't know that I did. You'd have to remind me. It's been a while.
Okay. If you watch this video, it's a long video. He's messed up. He's not like questionably impaired. He's like, wow, this guy's messed up. And what bothers me about our approach to DUI, marijuana, drugs, alcohol, whatever, is here's a situation where if your child was found on the side of the road like this, like Tiger Woods was found, as you see, if you see the video, you'll see it. You would want the police to take your child to the hospital to be examined by a doctor, because you don't know what's wrong with him. You don't know what, it could be drugs, but it could be a dangerous drug interaction, and you want to get that looked at. It could be he had a stroke, some kind of neurological problem. He was really, really odd. And I would think that it would be safer for society, and particularly for the guy you found on the side of the road, in this case Tiger Woods, to take him to the hospital and have him examined by a doctor. And while you're there, you could have a blood draw. What they didn't do with Tiger was they didn't take him to the hospital. They took him to the police station and they had him pee in a cup. And it's stunning to me because, number one, you probably should be concerned about this guy. Whether it's Tiger Woods or not, you should be concerned about this guy's safety. And they are not at all trained to be concerned for the safety of the individual. Their job, their training is to get the evidence to get a conviction. And I'm not saying there isn't somewhere in there. Maybe there's a mention of maybe there's a medical problem here. In the training manual, and the hundreds of pages of training manuals for these DUI arrests and marijuana drug DUI arrests. Somewhere there's a mention, maybe the guy's got a medical problem. I don't think there's any mention of calling an ambulance to take the guy to the hospital anywhere in any of their training. It's all about getting arrests, getting convictions. And if they had taken him to the hospital, they could have gotten a blood draw, and we would have had a much better idea what's in his system. If you want, a drug test is far more credible and more persuasive evidence of guilt, but you also get the benefit of helping the person, which shouldn't that be important?
It should be very, very important. And I agree with you that a blood test should be done. I think you're right on that medical professionals should be doing that and not law enforcement, who we have so many examples of how they're biased and how the science that's being applied here isn't good science. But the thing is, it really falls short on this marijuana issue because the studies say that we don't have good numbers because it stays in the system for 6 weeks.
I don't know with the NHTSA study. It says they did blood samples, and my experience with blood testing of marijuana is it does show active versus inactive marijuana. I can't say in this case, I can't say that they did look at it. I mean, it says THC positive. THC positive is a reference to the active marijuana, not the inactive marijuana. But I can't. I guess I don't know. I haven't looked at it for that question. You're bringing up that question, and I haven't looked at it.
That's really what I think what the disagreement is about. I mean, it's a good question. But I didn't know that.
But blood testing does show. Well, I'm telling you, blood testing does show if they do the right test, which every case I've seen they do. They look for both the active delta-9 carboxy THC. I hope I'm saying that right. And then they also look for the metabolite. So if they only come up with the metabolite, and I'm the defense lawyer, I can't wait to go to trial on that. I'd love to go to trial. And the prosecutor will say uncle usually. But I don't know where you're getting it from that blood testing does not show active versus inactive marijuana. Every blood test I've seen, it does.
I'm just looking at the metabolites were measured in the study. I mean, it says, I'm pretty sure it says.
What page is that?
Well, I have it in my notes. I think it's on the second or third page. There's only about 3 minutes left. Of course, we can just start it over.
Oh, we can wrap it up. I gotta get back to my life. I think when you're talking about those meta-analyses, those are other papers. Those are articles by other authors.
No, it's in your article. It's actually right here. It's on page 2. Actually, I see it right here. It says, yeah, the quote that I gave you earlier is from page 2 under meta-analysis.
That's by a different author. It says a recent meta-analysis by Lee, 2012, used 9 studies, 5 of which were based on self-report. The other, that's someone else's study about something else. The conclusions in the paper are based on their own study, which is later in the article. And I'm not saying you're wrong that they didn't measure properly, but I don't see that. And one of my beefs about this article is I don't see the data.
Okay, I'd really like to find out. You can
read it on
after the debate.
On page 3, near the bottom, it says drivers who tested positive for inactive cannabinoids were not considered positive for marijuana. So they did test for that in this article. It's NHTSA's crash risk study. The study that they did look for that. And it says, in this study, the term marijuana is used to refer to drivers who tested positive for delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, THC. But drivers who tested positive for inactive cannabinoids, which are the metabolites of delta-9 THC, were not considered positive for marijuana. Maybe it's delta-9 THC and delta-9 carboxy THC is the metabolite. I don't remember. Unfortunately, my brain is not connecting on that one. But so they did consider that in their study. You're looking at their report of a previous study done by someone else. Anyway, we got 3 minutes left. So if you don't mind, I'll just give some brief remarks to wrap up. First of all, it's very challenging for people. I mentioned this before. It's important to overcome the propaganda you've been burdened with since you were a child and recognize that, first of all, yes, alcohol does increase driving risk and you shouldn't drink and drive. Now, it's my advice, by the way, that you shouldn't drive after using marijuana. You shouldn't drive after using Xanax, all these other drugs, not because I think it increases your crash risk. It increases your legal risk. It increases the likelihood you'll have to hire someone like me to save you or minimize the damage from what the police are going to do to you and the system is going to do to you. But I think we got to recognize, wait a minute, the real question is not, does something impair? Because you could say anything impairs. The real question is, does this behavior increase driving risk, crash risk? And the answer is, for everything but alcohol, the answer is no. And we shouldn't use the police not